Next session, it's a book talk, and our speakers are Adhiraj Parthasarathy and Mr. B.P. Acharya. I request both the speakers to come on to the dais, please.
Friends, can I ask all of you to please settle down? Excuse me, friends. Will you all please settle down? Come on. We have a very interesting situation today. We have Mr. Acharya with us, whose guru, an English teacher, has written a book of poems in Odia, and he writes in Sanskrit and in Odia, besides being an English teacher. And as his Guru Dakshina, he is having this book released here and talked about here. That's so touching and moving and important. Adhiraj Parthasarathy is a Hyderabadi here with us and has written a book in Urdu about his experiences and learning from a census that he participated in. And I would not like to take the thrill away from it, but to tell you that he has some very interesting things to say. So we have a book in Odia and a book in Urdu that we'll be listening to today. And we requested someone from Mumbai who's participated in Hindi film and Hindi theatre, Ms. Sanjana Kapoor, to come and release these two books. Sanjana, would you mind, please? There can't be a more befitting Mr. Acharya will also tell us about the Guru and read a bit from that. Will you release Adhiraj's book as well? Thank you.
And what's here? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll first have Mr. Acharya talk about Mr. Rath and about the book, and then after 20 minutes, Adhiraj takes over. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for the kind words of introduction, and thank you, Sanjana, for very kindly releasing the book of my teacher. It's a very touching moment for me, since that he is 90 years old, unable to move. Actually, his son was supposed to come here and read it out for him, the book, the poems from his book. But he is also with him, looking after him, because he is critically ill. Today, as we speak, he is critically ill. So he authorized me that as my student, you are supposed to read it out and get it released. That's how I'm here. And in fact, he is a very well-known literary figure from Odisha, and who was recently in the last list of Padma Shri. He is one of them, awarded Padma Shri day before yesterday, selected for the Padma Award. That's a fitting tribute to him. I deem it a privilege actually to be able to read his works. As it was told by Mr. Ajay Gandhi in the introduction, he is a professor of English but writes in Odia. But we found that he had a very big collection of English poems and English essays and the like. We had to literally persuade him, kindly get it published, because he is a firm believer that you can express yourself only in your mother tongue. It's an effort which should not be made to try and express in other languages, but of course he's translated in various languages, Hindi and English and other languages, but this is the first time he published his own English works, book of poems. I will read out a few poems from this, and as a finale I'll read one of the poems in Sanskrit. This is a bilingual book, Sanskrit and English, which Sanjana just released. This has poems in Sanskrit with English translations all by himself. This is presenting Chandrasekhar Rath to the audience here. I will just a brief word of introduction. This is his photograph. Chandrasekhar Rath, at this point of time, is by any measure among the frontliners in Odia literature. He is a fairly well-known name both in the field of fiction and non-fiction for more than 5 decades now. He got published when he was past 30 in early 60s and never looked back. Right from day one, therefore, his workmanship and utterances bore a stamp of maturity, perception and style. He is now 90. He is a deep thinker, eloquent speaker, fascinating creative writer, touching all genres of literature, a creative artist with his hands on sculpture, painting, clay modeling, doodling, carving on wood and stone, and an inspiring teacher. That's how he is truly a Renaissance man who quotes Upanishads to explain T.S. Eliot. That's how I got impressed. In his own words, I will introduce the book of poems where he says, I'm quoting him, I have ever felt something mysterious in me intervening in my creative life, but it has never been clear to my perception. I realize in retrospect that at times when I was poised for a transcendence of my limit and I faltered for a word or an expression, it has surprised me by popping up like a rabbit from the magician's hat. The right word at that right moment was invariably the result of this intervention. The best of my essays, stories and poems contain numerous evidences of this mystery. This is he acknowledges the divine hand in what he writes. So most of his poems have a spiritual and philosophical tinge. He is a scholar of Upanishads and Sanskrit verses. I will read out a few poems as a representation of his work. First poem is Just a Breath. Is just a breath, a mere heartbeat, a wink that separates the dream from the dreamer? Is it a flash, a cadence, a far-fading whisper, a dumb ecstasy, a wide-eyed wonder, a blazing sun, a sky full of splendor, a deep-throated thunder, the green hush of woods, a splash of stars on rocks, or nothing, sweet nothing? Dream stuff or froth in air, dreamer or a gush of wind? The turtle bears the burden on the hood of infinity. In a vast haze of unknown, who is the dreamer and what's the dream? This is how he ends this poem, as always with a philosophical tinge in it. Second poem I have selected, it says, I never prayed on Sundays. I never prayed on Sundays, free for pleasure and pastime. Then came a Sunday, huge and endless. Time lost count in a limitless void. Every day was a Sunday. Open and blank and frightful, I had no evidence of myself in a desolate stretch of space and time. This Sunday is no longer a day. It's the rest of my life. An ocean shimmering in sunlight, too large for my canoe, a dot on the breast of infinity. I came on my knees and prayed. The Sunday never breathed or bothered. I am not sure if I am still alive. From second to second, hours and days in a rhythm of movement, I did pray for a Sunday. Dear Lord, but what is this? He must be praying like this in his, let us all hope for his early recovery, and he is very seriously unwell. There are many utterances of his on nature, about trees. This is one which says the highway tree, about cutting of a tree. I don't plead for mercy, kill me if you must. But remember, there shall not be another like me. In the tomorrows to come, I stood here in sheer majesty to give shade and shelter to your ancestors. I am the oldest, the biggest banyan tree. I have seen history parading under me. I am your history, the ancestor of your ancestors, worshipped by mothers, loved by truant sons, hid in my tender leaves for generations and generations and generations. Now you come and say you would kill me? The huge hacksaw has the clots of my brother's blood. 99 of them you have killed. You have come to me now, the highway tree. There's one more on tree. It's called the tree. I stand dumb and desolate, sucking milk from mud and water. Blind tongues sink into deeper darkness. Life streaming beneath the skin puts forth branches skyward. Leaves rustle, feeding on light and air. The music of the woods, flowers and birds, unheard by the roots deeply buried. The dumb tree is a shiver. Some delight disturbs the core. The thrill blossoms forth, bursting to flames. The playful wind, churning the branches, sends a message home to wake up. Something stirs within, deep. Eyes open as glistening, listening flowers. In the delight of discovery, I discover my home abroad. In the colonies of stars, throbbing waves of light, singing inscrutable incantations. In the hush of sweet and dumb delight. There are many more on the other, the unseen, the infinity. This one is called the other. The other is never unseen and unknown. The other is the other than me. The rest of total existence minus me. The other is within and around, above and below. Incomprehensible, inexorable. Is my body, my mind other than me? Activities, feelings and thoughts, relations, sweet and bitter, love and hatred, my life, my death, other than me? My limbs, my senses and my system, breath and blood, navel and genital, other than me? My name, my form, my attributes, my identity, my memories and dreams, my past, present and future, other than me? The other conceives and delivers, suckles and sustains me, loves, inspires, covers and kills. The womb and the tomb is the other. What's this me then? There's one more of the same genre. It says, now if you please. Now if you please, I have nothing to offer. You never came when I had. My sky is a rectangle, sliced and small. The walls are fast closing in, and I am knee deep in water, perhaps in mud. You chose to appear when I am the least prepared for the honor. Is asking, is like the master appearing before the creation at the end. There's one more of the same line. It's called a lone finger from infinity. A lone finger from infinity touches my forehead center, I glide across spaces dark, of unknown fragrances sweet, clusters of divinity bright, luminous giants of innocence, stars or fireflies in the dark dome, the featureless face of infinity, the mysterious breath from nowhere, cold columns of silence deep, bewildering and vast. I tremble in my little measures and wake up for the finite. Smiling face of my father, kind caressing look of my guru is my tribute to my guru in a way. There are some poems which he talks about how a poetry is born, how a poem is born. Poetry is throbbing around is the name of the poem. The soul is awake when poetry is around. It weaves into every breath, excites the cells to a summer flood, thumping the great sleep away. I feed on sleep and owe no apology for it. Poetry is another food, offering the experience of worship, and sex is one complex. It's all the same. If I read or write, to be the dream or the dreamer is all the same. For the soul is awake all the while when poetry is throbbing around. There's one more which reads, Birth of a Poem. Part me asunder for a god to emerge. Tear the oyster for the pearl. The mother is torn every time. She delivers a soul. How can a poem be born unless petals of blood drop noiselessly from my heart onto this barren sheet of paper? Give me the eyes to see beyond appearances. Give me the eyes to see beyond appearances. Ears to hear the silent sob, the mute misery to feel. Let me hold the earth in the cup of my palms. Let me hold the earth in the cup of my palms to give it warmth of love. Then only can a poem trickle. Then only can a poem trickle to drench its deserts and deck it with flowers, known and unknown. Then only can a song be heard. Then only can a song be heard to verbalize the symphony of stars. These are the few on the creative genius that he was. I will end with a poem from the Sanskrit book of his. This is a bilingual book, Sanskrit with English translations by himself. It is like a prayer of his when he is on his deathbed in a way. We hope not. It's titled Na Kangshe Sukha Sobhagyam. Na Kangshe Sukha Sobhagyam. For those of you who don't understand Sanskrit, I will read the English translation. Na Kangshe Sukha Sobhagyam Na cha Varanasi Gatim Alam Yashah Alam Kirti Alam Gaurava Malikam Prayana Kale Manasa Tava Somya Rupam Namamritam Tu Jivagre Hrudipada Padmam Viksham Dehi Prarthayami Tapadvara Deshe Dehi Kinchit Bhavadiya Karuna Kataksham. The Sanskrit, the English translations reads like this. No desire. I don't desire for comforts and good fortune, nor the end of my journey at Varanasi. Meaningless are reputation, fame, and garlands of glory. At the time of my departure, I supplicate for the benign face on my mind, the nectar of the name on my tongue. I am praying for alms at thy doorstep. Grant me just a glance of the gracious eyes. Karuna Kataksham. May he have the Karuna Kataksham when he leaves this his earthly body. May the God be with him always. Thank you very much. I end with my tribute to my professor, my guru. He has inspired me throughout my life for my creativity, and I owe a lot to him. I can never pay appropriate Guru Dakshina, but the least I could do is to read out from him. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Now I invite Adhiraj Parthasarathy to talk about his book.
Hello, can you hear me? Is this clear? This one. Hi. So my book is called Aao Fugan Aur Bhi Hai, which is a book about the socio-economic and caste census and my work with denotified tribes and who were formerly known as criminal tribes across most of North India and the northeast of India. So I'm just going to read a few excerpts from the book and how this started off. This was a special census conducted by the government of India called the Socio-Economic and Caste Census, which was conducted in about 2011 and 12. And spilled on till 2013. This was independent India's first and only caste census. In the late 2000s, a call for independent India to conduct its first ever caste-based census was put forth by various caste-based parties in Parliament. The people want to know, the caste-based parties said, what the distribution of wealth and resources across communities was in the 70 years after independence, whether reservations and affirmative action had benefited people in India and who had benefited the most from affirmative action programs. Caste had not been canvassed in the regular census as a question since independence, and there were no accurate figures. Nobody knew the percentage of various communities in India and what proportion of assets they held and what their socio-economic composition and other details were. So the government at first resisted including caste as a question in the census, but then under increasing pressure from various political parties had to succumb and include caste as a question in the census. This was a politically sensitive hot button issue that generated a lot of heat, and they felt the compromise was the best solution on the issue. So after a lot of debate, it was agreed that they would include caste as a question in the census, but it was agreed grudgingly. Now by the time they agreed to do this, it was already 2011. So the census had already prepared the schedule for the census questionnaire, and the Registrar General of India had already started the process of printing the census questionnaires. So what had happened is that the census schedules had already been printed, and the Registrar General of India, which conducts the normal every once in 10 years census, said it's too late, we can't include caste as a question in the census. If we include caste as a question in the census, we will have to revise the entire census questionnaire, and they refused point blank basically. They said it has been decided years in advance, it will cause an increase in the non-response rate, and there will be all sorts of issues if we include this. People will refuse to give us the other information because it's a sensitive question. So the matter went back to the government, and the Registrar General of India refused to issue this. So now this was a sensitive issue, so they had to look for other departments to conduct the census. So they sent the file for this to all the various departments in the government saying who will conduct the caste census. So nobody bit the bullet. Nobody said we will conduct the caste census. So finally they had to give this to somebody, so they decided the Ministry of Rural Development is going to conduct the census. So they sent the file to the Ministry of Rural Development, and they said you're going to conduct the census. Basically the government had no interest in conducting the census. It was not in the interest of the government of the time to conduct the census. It was in nobody's interest to conduct the caste census. Nobody wanted to actually know the composition of various communities at that point in time. It was a politically vitiated climate. So the government wanted to bury the issue and shopped around for a suitable method to obfuscate the census, to obfuscate the issue and sideline the question of caste. So what they did was they sent it to the Ministry of Rural Development. Now the Rural Development Ministry was a very smart ministry. They didn't want to conduct the census either. So they said that considering the demands of the current period and the demands for using high-end technology, it is best to involve the Department of Atomic Energy in the census. So they sent the file to the Department of Atomic Energy. So it went to the Department of Atomic Energy, and the Department of Atomic Energy said that they will conduct the census. So, but the Department of Atomic Energy woke up and realized that they had a public sector unit company under it, which was basically involved in the manufacture of black and white television sets. Now this is 2011. Black and white television sets are no longer being manufactured. So in 2011, with no black and white television sets being manufactured, this company had no business at all. So they decided that they'll take up this activity, and they tied up with another PSU company, which was involved in the manufacture of bakelite telephones, rotary Gumantu telephones. So together the two companies decided that they're going to conduct this census. So together these two companies set up a joint, made a joint decision to conduct the caste census. So can you imagine the ridiculousness of the situation? In 2011, the independent India is conducting its first ever caste census, which hasn't been conducted since the British period, and they've given this to the Department of Atomic Energy, who will conduct it for the Ministry of Rural Development through a company that is manufacturing bakelite telephones, rotary telephones, and black and white television sets. Of all people, and then they realized that the bakelite telephone company and the rotary and the black and white TV company don't have the ability to conduct the census because it requires mobilization of lakhs of people across India. So what they decided was that they're going to do this in public-private partnership and involve third-party private companies to do this, which is where they tendered out this project to the lowest price bidder, which is where I ended up. And so in the ridiculousness of this entire situation, I ended up being the lowest price bidder for the Himalayan states which nobody wanted to do, which is Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and by some strange circumstance, Odisha, where Professor Rath is from, and also Uttar Pradesh. So these were the states that were allotted to me, and I had to conduct the socio-economic and caste census in these areas. They had to come up with a grand name for this activity. So they came up with the name socio-economic and caste census, so that they made it seem like it was not just about caste, but it was about a whole bunch of other issues. So this was the socio-economic and caste census. Someone would have come to your door and asked you what your caste was and other information. This was a pan-India activity that was, I'm sure somebody would have come, or they might have maybe fraudulently entered the information on your behalf. But this was a pan-India activity, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit of excerpts from what happened with me in this. So I started this activity first with Sikkim, which is a very small state with about 6 lakh in population. So we started this activity in Sikkim right before the winter season started, and in Sikkim there are about 1,400 enumeration blocks. The census divides the country into enumeration blocks. An enumeration block is a group of about 300 to 400 households, which comprise of about maybe about 1,500 to 2,000 people at best. So, and these are typically, it could range from an apartment block to a locality to a village or so in size. So we had completed the enumeration of almost all the enumeration blocks in Sikkim right before the start of the winter season. And then suddenly one of the secretaries in the government wakes up and tells us, but no, you haven't finished the enumeration of Sikkim. There are about 60 forest blocks. Now we didn't know what a forest block was. There are about 60 enumeration blocks which are in the forest, which you also have to enumerate. So we had to go and start enumerating these forest blocks. Now it turns out that there are people that live on forest department land, and this was and they have to also be counted in the census, and have to go and ascertain what their caste is, and also collect socio-economic and demographic information about them to add to the census schedule. So this turned out to be a particular challenge for us because these people lived in particularly remote areas which took more than 2 days just to get there. And it turns out what happened was we had no information at all about them, and we had to liaison with the forest department for this information because we had to get forest department permits to enter these areas. So it turns out that each one of these blocks had less than, now a typical enumeration block has 300 families, so it's worth the time to go and visit an enumeration block to count 300 families. You must remember we were getting paid on a per person enumerated basis. So the more people we counted, the more money we made. But in this case, there were like 6 people, 7 people living in each forest enumeration block. And we had to travel 2 days just to get to an enumeration block. So it wasn't financially viable for us to do it, but we had to do it anyway. So we'd go to these forest blocks, which were in the middle of nowhere, and then we'd have to start counting 7 people, 8 people, 9 people. It would take 2 days, 3 days just to get to these blocks. Now, one of these blocks that I'm going to talk about is something called Chungthang Forest Block, which is on the border with China, right at the extreme end. What happened before 1962, it was a porous border where the where the Tibetan yak herders would cross the border and come across to India, and then they would go back when the grazing season ended back to China. But after the 1962 war, the border got sealed, and these dog pass, they were called dog pass, these yak herders got stuck across the border in India, and they couldn't go back to China. So they were stuck in, they couldn't go back to Tibet, so they were stuck on the Indian side of the border. So they settled down there and they lived a nomadic existence, but nobody knew exactly where they lived. We just had some idea that there were about 6 families or 60 families or something like that in those areas, but we didn't know exactly where in the forest. And these weren't typical forests in the sense of what you think of forests as in the forest of Chhattisgarh or in the forest of Telangana. These were actually frozen deserts. These were high altitude frozen deserts with mountains in between. And the enumeration blocks, when we received the maps for the enumeration blocks, they would stretch on for hundreds of kilometers. So we had to, in hundreds of kilometers, track down 6 families. So this was a nightmare of an experience. So, and the forest department appointed one forest guard. His responsibility was to guard something called the Sikkim Sundari, which is there's an actual flower. It's a rhododendron flower, which is a Sikkim Sundari, and this is a rare flower which is illegally harvested, and it's found only in the frozen deserts of North Sikkim. So his responsibility was to guard this flower. So he used to travel all these areas of the North Sikkim desert, trying to guard this flower, and he was responsible for looking after the Dokpa yak herders of this desert also. So he was given the responsibility of helping us find these yak herders to enumerate them. So we would travel in an SUV through all of these areas, looking for these yak herders. And when we took the SUV and we found the first family in the cold desert, they literally ran when they saw the car. It was like as if they'd never seen a car before. They started running for hours, and we had to chase them in the desert, and it was impossible to just get them to answer any of the basic questions. And they had no conception of what caste was. Now you have to remember, this questionnaire that was designed was a highly logical questionnaire that was designed by the government. It asked people, if I ask you, have you ever cleaned toilets in your life before? What kind of response are you going to give to that? And I mean, I can't even ask most people, have you cleaned toilets in your life before? But those were the kind of questions that were asked in the census schedule. Because it was also linked to, and then when we went on to Uttar Pradesh after that, people realized very quickly that this socioeconomic and caste census questionnaire was linked to the BPL status and the giving of benefits before that. Giving of benefits to below poverty line residents on the basis of this. So people would line up at our offices before we even started the activity, because they knew that they would be getting the benefits on the basis of the information we provided. In Sikkim, nobody cared about the benefits. But once we started Uttar Pradesh, thousands of people would stand in line, and they'd carry all these big files full of Hindi information and snippets of news articles and photographs of themselves and all sorts of documentation proving that they were actually falling below the poverty line. And everybody lied. They lied consistently throughout about all of their information. Like, I would ask them, do you have a cell phone? Do you have a phone of any kind? And they'd have a cell phone right in front of me, in front of my eyes. I would see the cell phone and they'd say, nahi, hamare paas koi cell phone hai hi nahi. So it was a consistent, the entire activity was a farce. In Uttar Pradesh, half of the data was fabricated. The way the government organized this was that they would appoint one officer from the government who would go door to door and knock on people's doors and collect information, and this was typically and one operator from private agencies such as ours would go and along with them and would key in the information on a tablet PC which the government would provide. And one operator from the government from the private agency would go with the government and key in the information that the government officer would collect. But the government, unfortunately, especially in Uttar Pradesh, appointed class 4 employees for this activity. So they were malis, they were Anganwadi Karyakartas, they were people with a class 8 education primarily. So they were not able to collect the information, and most of the information, as far as I can tell, is highly suspect, because it showed a very high level of bonded labor still occurring in Uttar Pradesh. It showed a very high level of Sikkim, for example, has no manual scavenging at all. That's an established fact. There is no degree of manual scavenging at all in the state of Sikkim, but it showed a very high level of manual scavenging happening in Sikkim. So the data is clearly either people did not understand the questionnaire properly, or later on we found out there's no actual Nepali word for manual scavenging. So So there were a lot of problems with this, and what has happened as a result of and the question for caste was left open-ended. It was not a multiple choice option. You could key in anything you wanted to. You could key in anything you wanted to for caste. So you could literally enter, you could say you're a Brahmin, you could say you're a particular caste of Brahmin, you could say you're a particular subcaste. They missed the distinction between Jati and Varna. So you could literally enter any combination, and you could type it in. Reddy could be spelled with a Y, it could be spelled with an I. So you literally ended up with millions of combinations of caste. And so the data is essentially unanalyzable, which is why the government has still not published it as of date today. So the book talks about this and many other such instances of how the government deals with caste as a question, including work that I've done with criminal tribes, denotified tribes of India, and with nomadic tribes several years after that. I'll conclude for now with that. Do you have any questions?
Could you tell us a little bit about the denotified criminal tribes? Did you manage to get data on them? And what is their status today? Because they still have this status, no? It still exists.
What has happened is that the government set up something called the NCDNT, which is the National Commission for Denotified, Nomadic and Semi-Nomadic Tribes. They commissioned a report. What has happened in 1950s, there was an Anantasayanam Iyengar committee report, which listed out which communities fall under denotified tribes, but they were not comprehensive enough, and these communities have a tendency to change their names. They go by a lot of synonyms and things like that. So nobody actually knows which communities are denotified and which ones are not, because the British listed some, but then they changed the names of the communities to hide from the stigma of being seen as a denotified community. So just compiling a list of the names by which they're known, because Sasi, for example, is a denotified community in Punjab and Haryana, but they go by more than 50 other synonyms. So there's no clear idea of which communities are denotified. There's very little data available about their current situation.
I'll just supplement to what he said. A colleague of mine, my batchmate in fact, Mr. B.K. Prasad is now heading this commission, National Commission. He sits in Delhi. I can find out details but he says I have no work.
Will you read us an excerpt from the book?
We're out of time now, I think.
We have a meet the author session after this. So if you just stay back here, then you could engage into your conversation with Adhiraj and Mr. Acharya again.
By the way, this book is available at the book point for those of you who would like to purchase it.
Why did you write the book in Urdu? If you had done in English, maybe you would have had a wider audience. Be aware of so much of the information.
The people I worked with are all still alive, so I didn't want to.
Did you get the money from the government?
I wouldn't want to comment about that.
What's the meaning of the title?
It means there are more places to sigh and lament. It's from, the word Shaheen, where that comes from, it's from the same poem. अगर खो गया एक नशेमन तो क्या गम मकामाते आहो फुगान और भी है. Yes, a little bit, yeah.
Just a minute.
How many years did you work on it?
Sorry?
How long did you work on this?
The socio-economic and caste census was about 3 years long.
Friends, we'll officially close this session, but these two gentlemen will remain here for you to have an extended informal interaction on any issue that you want with them. So, officially we'll end here. Ton of thanks to both of you for this. I really appreciate your Guru Bhakti and your respect for the great teacher that you have. And Adhiraj, you were a discovery for me. This was wonderful, absolutely. For all of us, you were a discovery and this was wonderful. Thank you so very much, both of you. I really wish that was in English.